Because oftentimes, too, because of being the eldest and the one that's hyper independent, we typically don't really rely on other people. And it's such a lonely place. And so that's something, too, that I've had to unlearn. It's okay to ask for help, it's going to feel uncomfortable. And it's okay to admit that you need help, And that was another part of that healing and liberation process of telling friends and being honest of like, no, I'm not doing well, actually. Like, the strong one doesn't have it all together, actually,
Hola, hola. Welcome to Entre Tías y Amiguis, the podcast where we dive into the wild roller coaster ride of adulting. I'm your host, Adri Rodriguez, a queer Salvadorian native, a first-gen trailblazer, and licensed psychotherapist, here to share wisdom, stories, and real talk with my tías and amiguis to inspire and uplift our community. I want to remind you that while I am a licensed psychotherapist, this podcast is for informational and entertainment purposes only. Now let's dive into today's conversation and explore the journey of adulting together. Grab your cafecito, get comfy, and let's get started. Welcome, everyone, to another episode of Entre Tías y Amiguis, here with another amiguis, another tía who's going to be sharing their wisdom with us. Suyapa, you're somebody that I've been following on social media for a little while, and I'm just so glad that we get to now, share stories and convivir, right? Like being in it together. Yes. I'm looking forward to learning more about you. So why don't you introduce yourself to us so that our audience can get to know you and your roles, any identities, anything that we should keep in mind as we listen to this conversation?
Okay. Yeah, so hola, amiguis. Thank you so much, Adri, for having me. I'm super excited to finally get to virtually meet you. So yes, my name is Suyapa. I'm a licensed clinical social worker, a trauma and anxiety therapist, and also space holder for healing. I primarily work with the Latin community, Latin adults who are unlearning, people pleasing, breaking into generational cycles, and wanting to reclaim their voice. I specifically love and enjoy working with siblings, adult siblings that have a disabled sibling or a sibling that struggles with addiction and mental health struggles. I'm also the eldest daughter of immigrant parents, one from Honduras and another from Tijuana. I am the eldest sister of a disabled siblings. So that role has deeply shaped the way I view myself, the way I move through the world, both personally and professionally. And my work is very much rooted in social justice, cultural liberation, and a belief that healing isn't just individual. It is very much so a collective experience. And that is me.
Thank you for sharing that. I am curious about, I always love asking like other therapists, how did you find yourself into this role? Because as eldest daughters, as helpers, right, many of us have held this positioning in our families and our friendship groups where people are coming and sharing about themselves with us. And then here we are on the other side as therapists. So what was kind of your origin story to ending in doing this work as a licensed social worker?
Yeah, that is a very complex question for me, just because it is very much deeply rooted in my own personal life experience. It is shaped by my role as a sibling. It is shaped being the eldest of a sister that has intellectual disability and also a brother who struggles with bipolar and addiction. I was accustomed to being the helper per se. I was accustomed to being like a second mother. I was accustomed to meeting other professionals in the field as a child. So other social workers, speech therapists, friends, like you name it. I was very much involved in those type of spaces at a very young age. So therefore, I just kind of realized like this is something that comes natural to me at this point.
Mm-hmm.
And I found myself in, even through high school, friends wanting to come to me for advice and stuff. So it just kind of fell, I guess, into my lap.
Makes sense. Makes sense. I think that is a very common story for many of us, how we end up here. I am curious about, we kind of prepare for your interview, we were talking about breaking generational cycles, right? Starting new cycles, setting up, understanding our family of origin, understanding the dynamics, understanding the world that we live in, so that then we can make more aware choices. And so I wanted to talk to you and your work that you're doing as a therapist first, before we dive into other areas. How are you defining breaking cycles? What does that mean? Because I know that's something that I talk a lot about and that many of us are talking about, but just to set up for the audience, what are we talking about? How are we defining breaking generational cycles and why that focus?
That's a really great question. I think it very much depends on our own individual journeys. I feel like breaking generational cycles has been a very hot topic on
Hmm.
social media and conversations around that. And yes, I think from the surface level, it might sound like, oh, I'm stopping doing this one thing that has been a pattern through my family, right? I think for me specifically, it has shown up in many different forms and ways, but more presently, I would say leaving a marriage that wasn't the healthiest for me. I think that in of itself, that process was very much breaking generational patterns or cycles that I didn't think I really fully recognized it until I was like in it, and was able to come out of it on the other end. For me specifically, I think that means that A, it's ongoing, B, it can look in various different ways, and C, sometimes it takes a few times
Hmm.
to break that cycle and try and learn something different and new.
What comes to mind for me is that, as you say, right, like it may take a few times, it may take for you to be in it to realize that this is something that is not in alignment with you or for you. But the thing about it is that sometimes we have come to learn that this is just what's expected and what's normal and what is valid. And even if it is not in our best interest, right? Growing pains of being in
Yeah.
positions where you're like, wait a minute, right? And that intuition that I think we all have, but sometimes we feel so disconnected in, right? Like that discomfort, like that physical, that I can't sleep, I'm feeling anxious. Like it can show up in so many ways. And in many times, that's kind of like the first, something's going on here that doesn't fit, but I don't even know how to name it. I don't even know how to investigate it because I'm looking at everyone around me living a pretty similar life and they're not having an issue with
Right.
it. Why am I not feeling like I can just continue going, right? When I see
Mhm.
it around me.
Yeah, completely. I think, for me personally, this wasn't the first relationship that I was in that wasn't the healthiest. It was the most impactful for sure, but definitely not the first one. And I think at a younger age, I recognize and realize that, and I can recognize how most likely it's due to my upbringing of needing to put other people's needs before my own, neglecting my own, of pleasing my parents, of making them feel proud to have at least one of their children, give them the typical life of their daughter getting married and potentially having kids and all of that comes with that, right? And so there's this, I think, added pressure to just get that right and give it to them, that what took the, I guess, was in the backseat or in the back burner, where was really asking myself, well, what do you really want?
Mhm.
And how does that, and what it is that you want, and how does that fit into your life now with your family and other external people that have been consistently indirectly or directly been influencing your decisions the majority of your life.
Mm-hmm. Many times we haven't been taught that it's okay to question them, right? Because we have
Hmm.
also the Latinx culture values, Latina culture values, like, for example, marianismo, that is this way, this is the way that women are supposed to show up. This is the way that daughters are supposed to show up. That is in a position of service, a position of helping. And the thing about it is that some of these expectations are not necessarily bad things, right? Like, who doesn't want to be generous? Who doesn't want to help their family when they're
Hmm.
struggling? But the challenge becomes when you haven't questioned how do you want to show up in service of your family? How do you want to be available for others? What boundaries can you establish to take care of yourself too? Right? Because a lot of people may even think that setting boundaries could be selfish, right? And it is actually the
Hmm.
opposite. That setting boundaries and these things is actually for the purpose of inviting people in a way that actually meets you where you're at. But if we've never been taught to do that, and we've seen over and over and over the women, the helpers, the parents show up in a particular way. Why would I show up differently? And giving ourselves that permission, because there is actual values and actual expectations that are not just created by you, but by la cultura, right? And
Yep.
we love la cultura, but there are some parts of the cultura that are maybe not a good fit for you. And so how does that show up for you or for your clients as you're doing this work of breaking the generational cycles, but also acknowledging that it's not a fault. It's not that you didn't realize this. It's your fault that you ended up in this relationship or in this career, the setup was like this, and now you're finally getting to question it, right? And so could you talk a little bit about how does that show up in your work or personally?
Yeah, I think in the work, it definitely is a common universal experience for many women of color, and yes, specifically Latinas and Latinx women, in the sense that there's so much guilt that comes with choosing yourself or doing something for yourself or saying no to something that doesn't fit right or feel right. And not just the guilt, I would also say even questioning our own identity, because oftentimes our own identities are so wrapped into the way we show up in our family roles or dynamics. And that sometimes translates in the way we show up in friendships too. So even in platonic dynamics and in how it shows up in romantic relationships. So it's a lot of having to sit with the discomfort of what that comes up with and building tolerance level for that discomfort. There's often times where I'm like, there's nothing I can say that's going to alleviate this guilt that you are feeling. I think it's just a natural, unfortunate consequence that comes with choosing ourselves when we're so accustomed not doing that. And then when we don't do that, it's also sitting with the discomfort of like questioning, like, well, then who am I without that, if that makes
Mm-hmm.
sense.
That makes sense. It makes me think my own therapist, when we used to explore my own feelings of guilt as the eldest daughter, as an eldest daughter that has walked away from her eldest daughter duties, right? Guilt was something that I really, really struggled before. And the way that she framed it was around guilt is a relational feeling that implies that you have caused harm, right? For me, walking away and being in a strange relationship with my family, there is a harm that I perceive, which is I have now stopped helping my family, and now they are going to struggle or experience more hardship or have to find resources to fulfill the role that I walked away from. And to me, that is perceived as harm, even though they are adults who have autonomy and who have survived a whole lot of things with and
Mm-hmm.
without me. But
Mm-hmm.
that sense of guilt, sometimes it just helps us name, right, that there is a change that is going to happen. And the guilt doesn't necessarily have to mean that you're harming someone, but that maybe the expectations are going to be changing. But that is something that a lot of people struggle with as they examine the role that they have taken in their families and realize that, yeah, like we have many of us, especially La Mayor, the eldest daughter, right, that we have been sometimes parentified and being like the third parent in the home, or as a child that speaks English, or as the child that is the smart one and the one that is doing good
Mm-hmm.
in school, right? That there is perhaps a perceived harm when you walk away from those duties and reestablish these new cycles, right? That's what we're talking also about, the generational cycle breaking. So it makes me think about, how do you address that feeling of guilt? How have you addressed it for yourself? How do you address that with clients? How do you support them understand? Because you're right, that feeling of guilt may never go away, but it doesn't mean that you shouldn't be exploring and evaluating how you want to keep showing
Right.
up.
Yeah. For myself, at least, I had to almost expose myself to that and making conscious, intentional decisions, even though I knew that that was going to make me feel bad or guilty. And it's really was just having to sit with that discomfort of it. And then knowing that the more exposure I get to that, the less that will impact me. And sure enough, over many years, definitely didn't happen within months, but within years, like that guilt definitely has decreased. It doesn't show up as often, it doesn't show up as intense anymore. And I think because of that, though, at least in my experience, personal experience, there is almost like a domino effect even within my own family dynamic, where my mom has done a lot of work on herself too, where she too has recognized how me being the eldest and the neurotypical daughter, it was affected too.
Mm-hmm.
So I think even her ability to acknowledge and validate that has liberated those pieces and healed those pieces of me too, that has let go of some of that guilt. So it's not only just me sitting with it, but I think it's also the domino effects of my mom saying, you know what, like, tienes razón,
Mm-hmm.
like we failed in these areas and I'm sorry for that.
Mm-hmm. How validating, because maybe some of us will never get that validation, right? And so how do we also validate that experience, that our roles, that our understanding of the world, that our view of our sense of self and our relationships, right? It's impacted by these expectations. And that feeling of guilt may never go away, but it may reshape into something else, may mean something else. For me, immediately what comes up is this thought around when we keep showing up in a particular way, we sometimes are getting in the way for other family members or for the dynamic to change too, right?
Yes.
And so here I am
Hmm.
burdened by this dynamic, but because I feel so guilty of leaving the dynamic, I'm not stepping away to see like what happens, the
What
domino
happens?
effect, because the domino effect can be really scary, may mean that some things fall apart. If I don't pay my parents' bills, are their lives going to get shut off because I'm the one that is in charge of paying the bills, right?
Hmm.
And so it's like, wait, who else can step in and support? Who else can show up? What skill can you teach your parents to maybe take care of this bill that you have been taking care for so long? So it's not about setting people to fail, but it actually is about giving them the opportunity and giving our family unit almost opportunity to reestablish
Yes.
expectations.
Yeah, definitely. And it's definitely not something that will happen overnight. And it's definitely not something that's comfortable either,
Mm-hmm.
because it feels very nerve-wracking and anxiety provoking because it feels risky. It's something that we've never done before, so we don't know what to expect. It's a big unknown space. And also we can only maybe think worst case scenarios, right?
Mm-hmm.
And like, is my family now going to hate me? Are they going to think I'm selfish, or am I going to be cut off? The list can go on. We won't really know though until we actually put it in action, and sometimes it's trying it many times and not just once,
Mm-hmm.
because I think the first time's always the hardest too, especially when it affects other people, and then they're going to look at us like, what the hell do you think you're doing?
Mm-hmm.
you know so it's like, see, I should have never done it, right? But it's like, wait, hold on, let's just hold on a little bit longer and see what happens. We can't just, throw in the towel for after the first try.
In therapy, we have that term, and I always say it wrong, homeostasis, the one
Mm,
term that is like,
homeostasis or stasis. Yeah.
this is
Yeah.
where being bilingual comes in.
Yeah.
We'll put the right word. But it is this, the systems are designed to bring us back to the norm, right?
Yes,
That
exactly.
state of homeostasis means we are used to operating at a level. And when you change that, the entire system is going to resist it because you're having to rebalance not only
Right.
yourself, but the entire system that is designed to stay as calm as possible. And you
Yes.
potentially making some of these changes may bring a little bit of a feeling of chaos, a little bit of disarray. Like, what do you mean? Like, we've always counted on you and now we can't, we won't. And there is a difference in saying, I won't do that for you versus saying, I can't do it right now, but I can take care of it later. Is
Yes.
a no today, but maybe yes next week. Is a, hey, I also have some things going on in my life. Can you let that settle so that then I can show up for you, right? Because
Mhm.
that first time that we challenge it, that no may sound like a no never. And it's like, how dare
Mhm.
you? How dare you just
Yes.
walk away? How dare you just do these things, right? But you're talking about this pressure. We're talking about this pressure that exists, that it is exactly that pressure what keeps us exactly in the roles that sometimes don't benefit us. And so part of your story, as you shared with me in preparation for the interview, has been about really challenging that
Mhm.
pressure that you felt as la mayor, the eldest daughter, as a sibling that is neurotypical, as a sibling that
Mhm.
is supposed to be living the dreams of like the parents becoming grandparents, right? So
Mhm.
how have these cultural values, these expectations, how have you actually addressed them with your family? Because it sounds like you had a, at least an experience where your mom was able to
Yeah.
validate that you were impacted by this expectation. Would you mind sharing a little bit about that process for you?
Yeah, it's been honestly ongoing for many years. I would say when it first started was maybe in undergrad, because in my majored in human services, and in that program we did a lot of our own work, and
Mm-hmm.
part of one of my classes actually was kind of like group therapy. And
Mm,
so that really gave me so much more insight and awareness of myself, of my family dynamics, of how being a sib just completely is my identity basically, you know? So I think I would bring these conversations home and I would talk to my parents about like this came up and I learned this and I learned that. And I think that's when the seeds started being planted. Nothing significant really shifted in a way, more so than just having open conversations where I can share. And then it evolved into my mom getting hired for the county to be a parent support partner. So now she was helping other families that were experiencing similar life circumstances, situations that she has or we have. And that I think really influenced her to unlearn a lot and also be more open-minded of how, like you said, the whole system gets affected,
Mm-hmm.
including me,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
you know? And so she created more of a space for me to then be honest about how these things have impacted me. And I think as time went by, many years went by, my dad kind of jumped on that wagon too. And I know we talked a bit before this, and like you mentioned, and I think I wrote in there something along the lines of, you know, incorporating a lot of like ancestral work has been so crucial in this process for me because I can see how when I started to shift or make different or choose aligned choices, that domino effect, not only was it in a tangible way with my family in front of me, right? But I can see how even outside of me that I can't see in more of the ancestral spiritual realm or world, there was movement happening there too, where I want to say less than a year ago, my dad called me out of the blue. And this is the first time he's ever said this to me. And he was like, you know, I'm getting older and I just wanted to ask you for forgiveness. And I was like so taken aback by that. And of course, I got emotional around that. And he was like, I know that he was basically, I can't pinpoint one exact thing, but I know that I was
Mm-hmm.
part of a problem too. And I'm sorry for that. And so, nor did I ever say anything to him, nor did I ever tell my mom, oh, I need my dad to nothing of that nature. But because I do believe that the ancestors were just working when I started making these aligned choices, and we're like, you know
Mm-hmm.
what? We're doing our part on our end too, if that makes sense.
Oftentimes, as I do my work with my therapy clients, I've heard them, for example, shying away from sharing with their family that they're in therapy, right? That they do this like thing in secret, or that they are getting this whole master's degree where they're questioning all the things, but they're not talking about it with anyone. And I did pick up a little bit earlier where you talk about, I started bringing those conversations back, not with like a demand, pídeme perdón, right? Like, this is
Right.
how you impacted me. This is how you hurt me. But hey, did you know that you
Mm-hmm.
two and we, by all right, like that we
Mm-hmm.
also as cycle breakers and cycle starters, we maybe are giving words to knowledge that has existed, because I think our moms, our dads, our grandparents, they all had their intuition.
Yes.
And for a variety of reasons, survival, necesidad, expectations, right? They didn't know how to listen to it or respond to it. But it's not like this is news. Like somehow you're discovering something new. It is likely that you are just naming, you're being just like the first one to name something and taking that courage to say, hey, there's something new, as
Mm-hmm.
to the level of safety that it feels like in your family of origin, right? For some families, it's not going to be safe to have these conversations.
Right.
But if maybe that is a part of, for our audience to think about, how safe is my family for me to begin sharing some of these things that I'm learning about myself? Because one, how wonderful it is to have parents or siblings that perhaps would be like, dang, like, is that what's been happening to us? Okay, I
Mm-hmm.
understand. All right, like, let's do it differently. Let me apologize. Let me take ownership. Let me take accountability. But that step of being the first, when you have been the eldest daughter, when you have been the first gen in college, when you have been first, yet again, here's another way that you might have to be the first. And it is labor. It is exhausting. It
Yeah,
is heavy.
100%. And I think too, I see it too with my own clients. Like they'll share with me, either this is my first time being in therapy or the first time I'm actually really talking about these really heavy things. And then I hear them, I talk to my sister or my brother or my tia or even a friend, like a best friend, and that of these parts of me that I never spoke about. And and then they talk about how beautiful that experience was. And then they talk about like maybe they're talking about something that their dads, for example, have done that have impacted them. And we hold space and we process that, right? And then next thing you know, a month later, they're like, yeah, my dad actually out of nowhere, like actually listened to me for the first time when I was speaking to him, when that's not really what I'm used to. And it's not like this person told their dad, like, you never listened to me or
Mm-hmm.
anything like that, you
Mm-hmm.
know? But again, this is just an example of how sometimes when we are doing our work or the inner work, and yes, it is a heavy load to carry, especially when you're the first one, that you will find that domino effect happens also not just in tangible, like people right in front of you, but the answers are listening, the ancestors are working their magic, so to speak, you know. So yeah, it's beautiful to see it happening in other people's lives too.
Mm-hmm. I love saying it's like, well, we'll see what opportunities the universe gives us to practice what
Yeah.
we just talked about, because it does feel like magic sometimes, right? But maybe we are forgetting that we had like this whole troop of support behind us, because when we're talking about being our ancestors' wildest dreams, we're not only talking about grind, we're not only talking about success, we're not only talking about like the good stuff, like look at the shiny things that I
Mhm.
get, right? But being our ancestors' wildest dreams sometimes is that being able to name what never had space before, being able to
Mhm.
understand something that has been happening generationally that nobody knew how to intervene and how to do something differently about it, right? And so being able to live in those ancestors' wildest dreams, it's not always going to be fun. It's not always going to be about grind. It's not always going to be about success. Sometimes it's going to be about holding the pain, and that
Yeah.
can bring a lot of grief for people to like realize that you may be the first one that is like realizing that this is not how it was supposed to be. And there could be a
Mhm.
lot of pain, a lot of grief, a lot of loss. And so how do we stay patient, right, with our families? Because
Mhm.
they too will be discovering this for the first time. And we are going to be going through it together, but changing that system that is wants us to just bring back, let's not talk about it, let's forget it, let's pretend it's not
Yeah.
happening. It's such a natural response to things like this because it is hard work. And if you've done this work for yourself, you know this work is hard work,
It's
and
hard.
it's not a one-time session. I'm
Mm-mm.
cured, right? It
Mhm.
is a process. And
Yeah.
then the more that you know about yourself, the more that you discover. And then you're like, okay, I got it. And now here it goes, the ancestor of the universe giving you another opportunity to look at this again,
Mhm.
because we're not quite there yet, right? So for you, I know that a big part of challenging this generational cycles did come in being able to be critical, and not critical like finger wagging, but critical like what's happening here with my marriage? How am I
Mhm.
showing up as a mujer, as a daughter, as a woman, as a person who is expected all these things? How did you come to realize that the way that your marriage was working out also was intertwined in the generational patterns of your family? Because if we zoom out, we likely would see that some of the challenges that we've had have also happened to other people, right? So how did you come to make that connection, that the
Mhm.
alignment or misalignment that you were feeling was not only personal, but also came from this generational patterns that you had learned?
Yeah, I don't think I fully grasp the sev I don't, let me use the word severity, the
Mm-hmm.
reality of
Mm-hmm.
it until I was actively going through the separation and divorce. And I actually met with an intuitive, and that was the first time that I had experienced that before. And it was so therapeutic. It was so enlightening and just healing in general. And some of the stuff that she shared with me really resonated deeply in a way that I could really see how my ancestors before me also experienced relationships or marriages that they stayed in that almost like killed them, really, you
Mm-hmm.
know? And
Mm-hmm.
I mean that by because putting up with so much abuse can leave someone physically depleted too,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so I think recognizing, and I knew these things because of like stories that my own family would share with me, like, oh, tu abuela, esto le pasó a ella, or, and so through those stories, I would put pieces together of like, I see what's happening here. And one of the things that this intuitive told me was, she's like, your grandma is basically saying like, you like my grandma died prematurely. She died at a very young age and also sudden. And so she basically told me, she's like, she didn't get the chance to do what you're doing now. And that was so impactful for me that that's what I mean by like, I don't think I really grasped it until like she kind of said those words to me. And I was like, wow, like this is now tangible. And so the more tuning I'm doing to myself and also creating space to connect with my ancestors, meaning my grandma, I have felt like she's telling me like, cuando tú te libres, a mí también me libres. So when you free yourself or liberate yourself, you're liberating me too y todas las demás,
Mm-hmm.
And that has really kept me grounded. That has really kept me rooted in my like, it's almost like a goal, a
Mm-hmm.
life goal.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It's like, you know what? I'm gonna live out my life for them the way that they didn't get the opportunities to do that.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's really the season or phase that like really I really grasp. Like, okay, this is the nitty gritty of that. You know what I mean?
It makes me think about there's a video that I've seen periodically on TikTok about we as women in 2025 many times have gotten to be the first one that has their own apartment, has their own job, has their own money, has their own resources, has their own power and decision making. And in something as hard as walking away from a marriage, right? Because it goes almost like against everything that we learned, that you're supposed
Mm-hmm.
to be a good wife, that you're supposed to stay, you have supposed to
Mm-hmm.
be down for like the nitty gritty, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the opposite, like the juxtaposition of I am going to love myself and liberate myself by doing something that is almost against what everybody
Mm-hmm.
else has told me to do. But I get to be the first one to make this decision because maybe the ancestors just didn't have the capacity, because they didn't have that bank account, because they didn't know that they could, because nobody had given them the permission or the access, or they had children to take care of and they didn't know how to do that for a variety of survival
Yeah, out of
reasons, right?
survival. Mm-hmm.
We get to do these really hard things, and these hard things are part of the loving ourselves and the liberating ourselves as well. But it can be
Mm-hmm.
contradictory because it's doing hard work, it's saying no, is challenging what everybody else just sees as normal, and yet that is done because of our love to ourselves, but also the love of the people that came before us that didn't have the chance and the opportunity to make these bold decisions.
Yes, and I think too, it's through this process is recognizing that ancestral healing isn't necessarily just like from what I just described right now. So something that maybe our ancestors didn't get to do from the past and now we're getting to do, but it's also because often I think before I used to think like, well, I don't have any kids. So I often would assume, in which many people probably assume this too, is that ancestral healing happens when like you do something different with your kids, right? So like how does that apply and look like for me who is a single childless woman, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And it's not only recognizing like, okay, it's not just fulfilling my ancestors' wildest dreams, right? Or living that. It's also knowing that I don't need to have children in order to pass this on, right? Like it comes in forms as being a nina, like a godmom, right? Or being a tia or a prima, like even with our friends, it's
Mm-hmm.
even happening. And I see it too, even with my clients, like this stuff is being projected and overflowed more than just myself. This
Yep.
podcast, right, is overflowing to and touching other many people. And that is, it's not necessary, I guess is what I'm saying. And it
Mm-hmm.
doesn't just fit in that box of like, have like it being applicable to having children, if that makes sense.
I absolutely love that, because one of my favorite phrases when I work with a lot of people that do similar work to us, and it's like the collective also includes you. the collective and the healing for the generations also includes us, right?
Yes.
When you're a parent, and also as a childless on purpose adult, right, person, I do see and hear from clients, for friends, right, that there's this extra layer of pressure when you realize that you're raising a whole human.
Mm-hmm.
Tell people, thank you for your service. We need good humans in this
Yes.
planet. I appreciate what you're doing.
Yeah.
That's a lot of work, right?
It's a lot of work.
So there is a validity, I guess, to think about or to associate generational healing being around this legacy that you get to pass on to your direct bloodline. But what you're saying makes me think about our inherent interconnectedness that we all have as the children of this planet, of the people that are living and experiencing life together. And that just because we don't share blood doesn't mean that there isn't a layer of interconnectedness, because even
Right.
what a magical moment. Imagine 100 years ago, our grandmas, la tuya en Honduras, la mía en El Salvador, tu grandma en Tijuana, la mía over there, right? Like the idea that you and I could meet across the internet, across wavelengths without ever having had a conversation and then show up and be like, girl, I know you're down for the same thing that I am. Let's go, right? Because this is our first time that we're like meeting and talking in the nitty gritty. There's a magical component for that I know I do it for others. Like I'm a tia too. I am like, you know, have that big sister energy. It's like, what do you need? Let me help you. But this stuff is healing for me. Like this is for me. This is the tia advice that I need to hear, because I'm also growing up along everybody else that's growing up. And when, for me, as a person that doesn't have access to their mom, right, I am having to find other women that can step in to teach me the lessons, because just because they don't share my blood doesn't mean that there's no value in these relationships. And that's how I name the Tías y Amiguis, right? Like this idea that we don't have to be connected by blood to be able to show up and to recognize the power of being in community, of sharing knowledge, of sharing the struggle, being like, looking to the side, being like, you too? Me too? Okay, let's keep going. Or you've been there, done that. How did you do it? Let me give you a couple of tips, because I do want you to have it a little bit easier than me, right? So you're talking about this inherent interconnectedness that we have spiritually, and, you know, as people are walking the earth at the same time.
Yes, 100%. There is this like it's like it's alive, you know? It's living in all of us, and exactly the way you described it, like being able to come from two different parts of the world, so to speak, and now in this moment connecting over something that is familiar and similar, right? Like that says a lot of how that connection or community or power, I would say, can move mountains. It is healing in that way. And I think that's why I preach a lot with my clients of like, let's get your chosen family like in line, right? Like who is that? What would that look like for you? Because oftentimes too, because of being the eldest and the one that's hyper independent, we typically don't really rely on other people. And it's such a lonely place. And so that's something too that I've had to unlearn is to, it's okay to ask for help. It's going to feel uncomfortable. And it's okay to admit that you need help, you know? And that was another part of that healing and liberation process of telling friends and being honest of like, no, I'm not doing well actually. The strong one it doesn't have it all together actually, you know? And there was so much power in just owning my own humanness and accepting that part of me that my community, my chosen family have shown up pretty strong. And I think that in of itself was very healing too. So yes, I 100% agree with what you're saying.
The other part that comes to mind, just this weekend, I read this article from therapists, from a lens of a therapist that was in disagreement about people like you and I, who are also therapists, sharing so much about our lives, right? We're in this transition period where I know that I take pit stops, and it's like, why am I sharing that? Is that too much? Is that appropriate? Is this or that? Right? But what came up for me as I read that opposition to sharing of ourselves is what you just saying, the shared humanity that we have. I may be a couple steps ahead of you, but because of those couple steps ahead, I can kind of walk along with you, but also a little bit ahead and be able to name these things. And I think for the people that we come from, for like the generations that we come from, where therapy is such a foreign concept, where there's so much stigma about mental health issues, right? When I was becoming a therapist, it's like, vas a trabajar con locos, right? Like you're going to be working with crazy people. There is like such stigma in our community that the authenticity and the shared humanity really, I think it is inviting new people into coming into this process. And we're saying, hey, listen, like we've been through it. It was heck of hard, but there's this other place that you kind of end up in this journey where you can breathe, where you can
Yes.
be more attuned, where you can listen better to what's happening inside. And it's not about being healed and being cured and arriving at the destination, but it is about continuing to grow and continuing to understand. And I say this morning, I was having a conversation with someone and I was like, I look forward to being 80. I'm personally not scared of getting older because you know
Aging,
how
me
much
neither.
cooler, how much smarter, how many more
Wiser.
things, wiser. Like I'm looking forward to like getting older because the more that I go through this journey of life, easier, because it's not that the world got any easier. It's the way that I can carry the world. There is like more support, whether it's from people, chosen family, or even from myself with my ancestral team, right? Like that, we're going to carry it a little bit better and a little bit different. And maybe that is the part of the message today for the audience is that if you have been scared and you feel like listening to podcasts because therapy still feels really scary, right? Excellent. Take the steps. And the hope is that the more that you realize that we all go through this process. You're not alone in it.
Yes.
Likely your therapist has gone through a very similar
Mm-hmm.
journey as yours, right? We may not be taking the space and sharing all of the things with you in the moment because we're there for you, but that shared humanity, I hope is a motivation that therapy can be scary, but at the end, on the other side, or healing journey, whether it's connecting with ancestors or more traditional and non-traditional sort of ways to getting there, that you enjoy that journey because even that pain part of the journey is going to be so valuable at some point later. But right now it
Yes.
sucks, right? So it's like the
Yes.
both end.
Yes. No, 100%. Because I can reflect back in all the experiences that I've had throughout my life up until today. And it's given me access to empathy in such a different, intimate level, even with the people that I work with, the folks that I serve. That gives me a deeper understanding and um, awareness of what they are bringing in. And so, like you said, I might not share like, oh yeah, that happened to me too, or whatever, right? But do know that like I really see you, and like you said, like we might have walked through similar stages or phases or seasons in our life. And I think that's the beauty of, because I'm very relational in the work that I do too, that, you know, I can also be a representative of whatever it is that you are struggling with. It could be a sister, a mom figure, or a tia figure, or whatever, right? And rewrite that narrative and re-experience it in a more corrective, I guess you can say, way. There's so much beauty in the messy parts too of life.
Mm-hmm. And because we're afraid of the messy part, we sometimes want to skip it, right? Like the new, I'm gonna ask ChatGPT instead of go to a therapist, right? It's like you're bypassing the emotional
All
work that
the
it gets to the answer. The process of getting to the answer is as valuable as getting to the answer. And I think that when you're suffering, of course, you just want the remedy, you just want the answer, you just want to get better now. And so we're just saying, if you're listening today, the messy part that you might be in right now, it sucks. It's real.
yes.
We're not going to not validate that because we've been there, done that. And also, this part is going to become something very unique to your journey. And leaning into the hard is part of the work too.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. 100%. Totally on board.
Liberation, grief, changes. You're like in the middle of a bunch of transitions. And what are you reclaiming in this moment? What are you making space to say, I now know this about me. I know now this about the work. I know this about my ancestors. I know this about life. What are you doing with that information in this moment?
I think personally, it's been choosing myself in whatever way that may look like. So if things feel aligned, then that's a yes. If things are misaligned, that's a no. Just really honoring um, even how somatically like my body's responding to choices in everyday life. Like this feels good, and I know this like makes my nervous system relax and it
Mm-hmm.
feels calm. Then yes. And I think I've just been learning a lot about myself in the sense of, you know what, I don't have to do things that I don't want to. I have the privilege and freedom to do things that I want. And so I think it's walking in knowing that and walking in self-acceptance of, no, I'm not perfect, nor do I want to be perceived that way. So it's liberating to admit that I'm not perfect, right? And that I don't want to carry that role anymore or those expectations. I'm human, and that part of me, I accept the good, the bad, the ugly, the pretty, the loca in me, like all of it, all of it. So yeah, it's just that acceptance of myself has been really huge.
I love that. What do you think your younger self at any age, at any point, would be so amazed or proud or just like, what? Like that happened to us? Like, what do you think that the earlier versions of you would be happy, proud, excited to know about the stage of life that you're in right now?
I think she would be really surprised and amazed of how I'm using my voice and how I'm not hiding it anymore, how I'm not keeping things in anymore, how I'm being a lot more vocal, being more vulnerable, how I'm choosing myself. I think also knowing that to me was going private practice was such a big risk, and that is such a foreign thing too. I think knowing that I come from a family where stability is so much needed, right? And when it comes to your own business, that's a risk. You never know what's going to come in, what's going to go out. But I think trusting myself and my faith and my ancestors that I will figure things out as they come. And so far that's been working out. So I think she would be very surprised, pleasantly surprised and proud that we've grown quite a bit and taking a lot of risks.
It definitely sounds like it. How beautiful. A lot of work, but you're on this other side, and the more that is coming, how amazing. What do you wish more women, more mujeres in our comunidad could hold on to after listening to your story, after, opening their heart to the plática that we had today? What do you wish that they could take with themselves as you build this tia legacy, right? Like the interconnectedness that we're like the tias to those people that are not seeing us. What message do you want to leave for our audience today from you to them, from like tia Suyapa to the community?
I would just really want the community to know that yes, it might feel really scary to do something different, like choosing yourself. However, the risk of taking that can be a lot more beautiful than we can ever imagine. And I think it's also understanding that sometimes we have to be a little delulu to achieve our wildest dreams that we thought we could never, And so I don't think we've been allowed to really dream, and it's really taking that risk to like actually encourage and dare you to dream. And what would that look like for you? And even though as scary as that is, can we maybe just dip our toes in it and see how that goes? So I think that's what I would say.
So listen, everybody, the message from Tia Suyapa is be a little delulu.
Be a little delulu.
Dream big, try new things, take the risk, listen to your ancestors. Like they're guiding you. Amazing. Yes. Well, thank you so much for your time today. We can keep going. And I'm like, okay, don't ask more questions because then we're going to have a 2-hour interview. But what an amazing opportunity to share your wisdom, to connect with you and the people that have loved you through this medium and through the magic of the internet to get to meet you, and maybe at some point in person. So thank you so much for what you've given us today in the community through this plática. And on the show notes, I'm going to put all the links to get in touch with you. And so for folks whose conversation this resonated with, you'll know how to find your tia Suyapa to get some support. All right.
And thank you so much, Adri, for having me. I enjoyed this so much.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you so much for being here with us today. I'll see you all next week. Bye.
Bye.
If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe, leave a review, and share with your tias and amiguis. Your support helps us reach more people and continue these important conversations. And don't forget to follow us on social media and stay connected. Until next time, remember to take care of yourself, embrace your journey, and keep living life with heart, vision, and creativity.